Just turn on the mic. There's an on button on the mic.
Can you hear me if I speak like this?
Yes.
Mr. Speaker, we think that it's necessary that you keep updating your legal concepts and your legal doctrines as the times change. And that's the precise sort of action that we stand for on the side of House Government. What we want to do is to first obviously explain to you the concepts that are involved in this debate, and then tell you why the digital age is simply incompatible with the sort of exemption that has been created in favor of the government. But first, let me give you a brief outline of what I'm going to be talking about. First, I'm going to talk to you about what the Fourth Amendment stands for and why it is an important addition to the lives of ordinary citizens in places like the United States. I'm also going to talk to you about the basis for creating the exception to this, which was the third-party doctrine. Then I will examine the various aspects that we see being present in the digital age today and tell you why these simply do not warrant the continued enablement that the third-party doctrine gives to the government and its agencies. So let's first understand what we mean by the Fourth Amendment and the third-party doctrine, right? Because they're not inherently clear concepts, and that's one of the reasons we are really happy that NTU does not have a law school. But let's talk about what we mean by the Fourth Amendment. It is essentially protection that is given to the citizens so that their privacy is not unfairly and prejudicially invaded by the government. So a manifestation of this would be to the extent that if you do not have probable cause, you simply cannot barge into somebody's house and search it. Or if you do not have reason to believe that a person is engaging in some sort of illicit behavior, you do not have the ability to go and read through their correspondence in order to understand this. Why do we think this is a particularly important protection which continues to exist even today? We think there are a lot of classical reasons which hold true even today. First of all, we think that the basis for giving this protection to citizens is, of course, the fact that there is simply such a big imbalance of power between the government machinery and the ordinary citizen on the other hand. The government has so many coercive elements at its disposal. It can employ its various resources and agencies and personnel, and the fact that it regulates so many aspects of your life and has so much power over you simply makes it unfair to give them the ability to invade into your personal life and influence your actions. On the other hand, the ordinary citizen has very little power against the government. If we did not give this protection to the ordinary citizen, there are pernicious consequences that follow. First of all, we think there's massive scope for abuse. What this means is that if the government has certain information about me which I would not have wanted to reveal, it's possible to use it for abusive things. And we do understand that even in countries like the USA, the governments have very clearly shown us through scandals such as the NSA surveillance schemes that they are not particularly responsible when it comes to engaging in digital surveillance, right? They have already depicted a tendency towards snooping on people's lives. The scope for abuse means that, for instance, if I am doing things that the government does not agree with, it's possible for them to use forms of coercion so that I stop doing that. But more importantly, even if the government is completely benevolent in reality, we think that there is scope for self-censorship and that is pernicious. What this means is that the very fact that I think I might be doing something which the government would not like, for instance, watching a particular porn site, which I think the government would find objectionable, would lead me to stop doing that thing. For instance, if I think that my communication with a person who is an opposition, who stands in opposition to the government, might not be something that the government likes, self-censorship means that I cut down on the sort of correspondence that I would have engaged in otherwise. We think, therefore, that there are good reasons for allowing this particular this particular idea of protection against invasion of privacy. But then we created the exception, which forms the third-party doctrine, right? The reason why this exception was created, and before that, let's understand what the third-party doctrine itself means. It simply means that you are not given this protection if you voluntarily communicate certain information to a particular intended recipient. Now the key part here is the intended recipient thing, right? So what that means is that if I voluntarily, with no coercive force, such as the one that the government can exert on me, applying on me, go and reveal information to an intended person, it's possible for that information to be considered as if it were in the public domain. Now, I'll take you in a bit. The reason why I'll take you in a bit is because it's important at this juncture to understand why the digital age simply does not represent that sort of a situation, right? We think that the digital age that we live in is a pervasive one where our forms of communication are constantly being monitored necessarily by the digital service suppliers. And this is primarily the reason why we think that effective coercion exists on people today to reveal information as far as the digital service suppliers are concerned. Which is why we don't think the basis of voluntary intended recipient that was made for in the third-party doctrine exception should apply any longer in the digital age. Why do we think that it is not the case that there is indeed a lack of effective coercion in digital age, right? First of all, we think it's simply too much a part of our daily lives. What this means is that nobody today can live without being a part, having a presence on digital age. Everything from your job applications to paying your bills happens online. And the simple ease that it has offered, as well as the fact that other modes of communication are slowly being phased out, means that it's simply not possible to lead a normal life without having some sort of presence on the digital age and revealing some information to your digital age supplies. Before moving on, I'll take a POI.
Do you think it's fair in status quo to force individuals to testify against you about things that you said which you may not want to come out and show to?
We think that if the individual does not want to give certain information within their possession, you can't coerce that individual to come forward and do it. If you can prove that the individual has actively concealed that information which he got from a third party, then that might give you a cause of action to proceed against the individual. But no, there cannot be coercion by the government against an individual. The second reason why the digital age does not fit into this paradigm is simply because it relies so much on what we call the standard form of contracts, right? Which are basically all those little terms and conditions that you click on and say okay to whenever you download a new app or whenever you open your account in a new digital media page, right? The problem is that it's become such an accepted part of life that people do not realize, and in most, if not all cases, simply click OK without even ever bothering to go through the terms and conditions that are specified. We do agree, in an ideal world, everyone would read it. But the reality is that it has become so commonplace that we cannot ignore the fact that people simply do not agree to voluntarily reveal all this information to Gmail, for instance, when you send an email to another friend of yours. But the fact is, service providers like Gmail or Facebook do have all the information that you have transmitted while using them as a medium. They were neither the intended recipients of this information, nor was this voluntarily given to them. They were merely used as a medium to voluntarily convey it to some other intended person. And for this reason, also, we think that the digital age is simply incompatible with the basis that we had when we decided to carve out the third-party exception. And for these reasons, we are very proud to propose it.
We'd like to thank that speaker for his speech and to open the case for the opposition. We'd now like to welcome the leader of opposition.
Imagine a terrorist cell that exists merely as a series of internet networks, transmitting data intermittently, which leaving no physical evidence. Using data online and using this information is probably the only way to protect citizens at large from misuse of such information and threats to their life. I'm going to talk about four things, maximally. Firstly, why we don't think that you own the information that you already give up, and why it's similar to extensions of rights and status quo, and why it's not particularly different. Secondly, what this information specifically is and what it's used for. Thirdly, the kind of cases it's likely to be extremely important in. And fourthly, why there are real checks and balances in a real country, like the one that we want to talk about. It's not India, sorry. But there are incentives and checks and balances on both sides to prevent the misuse of information as you talk about, right? Firstly, why do you no longer own this information? The obvious reason is that you've already released this information knowing that there was a propensity of this information being used against you. That's why I asked my PO, and that's why it's extremely pertinent. The fact that in status quo, you can force individuals to testify against other individuals about what they might have said or what they might have done in their presence. You already allow the government to use information that you've revealed to other individuals apart from yourself to be used against you in a court of law. We think this right and third doctrine is merely an extension of that principle. The fact that once you've already performed an act in the public domain or communicated that information to someone apart from yourself or your legal counsel, you already have given up the right to use that information in your favor. So we think that's merely an extension of all already existing rights we give to the judiciary. But secondly, the fact that the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply to things you've already given up. The fact that there's massive discourse currently about the way this information is being used is indicative of the fact that individuals know that they're giving up this information. The fact that there's massive media discourse about the fact that the government has access to your information. The fact that the NSA chiefs are being forced to testify in front of the Congress and the Senate. The fact that you and I are talking about this issue in the first place is indicative that people do know that the information that they give up online is something that might be accessed in the future. So it's false to say that individuals have no idea that this information is being accessed by the government. We think discourse is prevalent about this issue, and there is a form of consent that they do give when they operate this. But more importantly, when does protection against unreasonable search and seizure become important? We think warrants are important and useful in certain kinds of crimes, right? Where the perpetrators or suspected perpetrators are extremely apparent, and it's feasible for the law enforcement to bring these people to court and ask for a warrant against them. But when we talk about networks of hundreds and thousands of people across different countries, or information spread out vastly across your country about people who you may not even know are part of that crime, we think for those crimes, warrants are unfeasible and only act as a barrier against serving justice to these individuals. We think the Constitution must strike a balance between the rights of individuals and the rights of society to protect themselves against individuals who misuse these protections in the Constitution to perpetrate crimes against other individuals. Yes?
Assuming for a second that you're right when you say that people may realize that the government has access to this information online, is it possible for the normal, ordinary person to disengage from the digital age?
All right. We think it is probable that this person may not be able to disengage. But just like in reality, you can't disengage from reality and talking to other individuals. But what you say to other individuals can still be used against you. We don't see how that's particularly different from you using a medium which you might be forced to use in the first place. We think the consent part is a minor point. The fact that it's an extension of real life means that the principles that usually apply in real life should be extended to those as well. What is this information and what is this used for? Because let's be realistic here. Usually this information is not things like recordings of what you told people or actual private information, but things like metadata. Things which establish patterns of patterns of calls or people you are calling. These are usually large-scale macro data which require statistical analysis to draw specific patterns rather than actually include private conversations and what's being said. So it's actually fallacious for them to say that this is actual content of what you might be watching or what you might be saying to other individuals. But more importantly, it's quite similar to the police tracking suspects in status quo, right? The more traditional forms of policing. When you follow certain individuals, when you follow them in their real lives and when they go to work and who they're meeting, like those traditional patterns are usually used to deduce patterns or establish correlations. We think this has become exceptionally hard now that all these things have moved online. It's probably exactly the same. It's the same as the police using a wide-scale kind of method to try and track broad objectives of what you're doing and trying to establish correlations from them. Remember, there is still a code in the judicial system for which you need to present this evidence for you to be tried in court of law. It's possible that this evidence may not be admissible at all. So it's not that the police is going to use information and you will get convicted. Third, what is this information used for and where is it important? Often it is used to fight crimes like terrorism and drug cartels, which depend on the transfer of information between different cells and the premise for their actions. Such communication is probably the only way to track these cells. The fact that there's extremely little things like hard evidence or hard physical evidence which is left by things like terrorists before major activities. The fact that people in these drug networks often don't testify against each other because of the massive pressure and threat to their families that they face from these large cartels. The fact that this is probably the only way to get to the solution of these crimes is an extremely compelling reason to allow this to be used in this aspect, assuming that they agree that these crimes are pervasive and cause harm to other individuals. But more importantly, this information is often not used in a court of law, but used as a lead-up to uncovering other information about individuals, which can then be used in a court of law. It's the same as police investigating aspects of your life without actually intruding your private life and knowing what you're telling different people, but just trying to establish broad trends about what you're trying to do, and then requiring a warrant to go ahead and actually search your house and get that information. So we think it's an extension of status quo. But for checks and balances, because they wanted us to believe that the United States is a country where there are no checks and balances and protections and rights for individuals. We don't think so. The first reason is there's massive scrutiny and reform of the NSA. There's massive political pressure in status quo to reform the way intelligence institutions use information about other individuals. I talked to you about impending legislature in the US Senate. The fact that they've been forced to testify and there's massive political scrutiny about these institutions means that this information is likely to be used in a manner, at least in the future, which is not going to be as harmful as they say. But secondly, we still have a comprehensive court system, which is ruling on the use of this information, right? So we don't think large scale, like the state or the police institutions, can use this information against you unfairly. You still have a right to be presented with this information and form a defense, and you still have the right to go through an appellate system which verifies the accuracy of this information and whether or not it's legitimate in the crime that you take. But thirdly, that's an argument for implementation of better institutions to make better use of this information rather than not using this information at all. I mean, that process is something that's already underway when you have such scrutiny. Fourth, there's a resource constraint and incentive to maximize state goals of protection. It's rather unlikely that the police in the state are going to go after you for your porn choices. The fact that resources are limited and there are certain incentives to the police, for example, get convictions, right? It's likely they're going to target individuals who actually pose a threat to society rather than going after frivolous claims like they talk about. But fifthly, there's democratic accountability and rights. If your problem is political persecution, there are two checks and balances. There's massive media scrutiny about political persecution, right? There's a massive gradation on different scale of media institutions which support and have different political leanings which will protect you. But there are things like opposition parties which have an incentive to call out things like political persecution if the government is actually going after people extremely crowded.
We'd like to thank that speaker for his speech, and now invite the next speaker from the government.
CCM.
Mr. Speaker, we're going to talk to you about 3 ideas in this debate. First, whether the sort of information that they're talking about is actually necessary to fight crime. Second, the value of privacy. And third, the importance of consent. Is the sort of information that they're collecting actually necessary? Let's understand this. We see that the problem with the side opposition in this debate is that they're collecting metadata, not just about particular classes of people, but about the entire population, about large swaths of people at once. And this changes everything. Because the image you have now is not of the policeman following someone who's looking suspicious at the end of the street. It's about the policeman having the ability to watch what everyone is doing at all points of time. We say that is the lens through which you should view this debate, and that is what makes this technology so problematic. So what is this about crime, right? They tell you that this is important because terrorist cells operate intermittently, online, and clandestinely, and this sort of information is essential to go behind them. We tell you that the legal process has given you adequate safeguards to find this sort of information when it's necessary. Why? We say that the legal process gives you this sort of information within the powers of the 4th Amendment, so long as you prove probable cause. Which means that if you go to a court and ask for a warrant to tap someone's phone because you think he's a terrorist, for even a simple reason that you saw him on the street making a speech about extremism and about how extremism is valid, the court will grant you that right. The standard for probable cause isn't very high, especially because courts in this day and age are so scared about terrorism that you give them any meager reason, they are going to listen to you. Which means your propensity to obtain information is not substantially restricted under status quo. In fact, under the Patriot Act, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this is precisely the standard that's used. The standard to go to court, take a warrant, and examine information with probable cause. This, on the other hand, the revocation of the third-party doctrine, is to enable organizations like the NSA, and that brings me to the second reason. Is this sort of data really useful in combating crime? We tell you that repeatedly, past NSA directors have come out and told you that when you have a large volume of data and you're looking for probable cause within that data, looking for people to suspect within that data, what you're doing is looking for a needle in a haystack. The amount of data you have actually prejudices your ability to pin down on that particular person who is actually committing that crime. So this data is ineffective if you're looking for what is actually maybe going to go wrong. This data is ineffective to predict future crime to a large degree. But when is this data particularly useful? This data is useful when you know what you're looking for. So if you already know my phone number and you want to know who else I'm talking to, this is precisely the sort of data that you need to use. So now that we've characterized the kind of crime that this data can track and the kind of stuff that this data can do. Let's talk about the state, privacy, and blackmail. Let's start with the premise that the state is an immensely powerful body and the state has the ability to use coercive power against you. The state can send an army to you and bulldoze you, and that is the sort of skepticism within which we view the state. Because the state can do such evil things to us, we are naturally skeptical of it. What does that mean? That means that they have strong privacy rights against the state and we must be able to protect ourselves against it. We tell you that the moment you give the state the power to find out the patterns of your life, what you like, what you don't like, your friends, your enemies, the websites you go to, the potential for political abuse is just too high. Look at the kind of information you're giving to the state, right? So if you're constantly calling someone whom the state thinks is someone who's their political opponent, you've essentially given the state the power to blackmail you. Why do we think that this isn't solved merely by the sort of democratic accountability or due process that they've talked about on that side of the house? First, we tell you that if the only recourse mechanism is that after you get harassed by the state, you can go to a court of law, appeal this all the way to the Supreme Court and get remedies, that's simply not enough. Because my right to lead a normal life is so valuable that I do have the right to be left alone on a day-to-day basis. I have the right to sit there and do whatever I please without having the specter of the state looming over my shoulder. And that is the sort of value that we have on this side of the house. Second, we talk about the effectiveness of media scrutiny and democratic process. Right? For a very long time, the state simply didn't even tell us that it was surveying us. This is the sort of state that we live in. For a very long time, the media could do nothing about it because when the media did publish information about this, even recently, they were classed along with Edward Snowden as criminals. We say that the sort of perfect system that you're talking about, where democracy takes care of everything, really does not exist. We have every reason to be skeptical of the state because the state in abstract looks very nice, but the state is actually a collection of individuals with political agendas, individuals who hate other people and who have lots and lots of power. If you're not skeptical of that, we don't know what you could possibly be skeptical of. Yes, sir.
The information that you talk about is public now.
Oh, yes.
Do you think going forward it's more likely that individuals demand accountability, inform institutions use this information in a better fashion?
So now this brings us to the idea that the sort of information that of public scrutiny, right? We tell you that it's impossible for public scrutiny to operate because of two reasons, and it becomes less effective for certain reasons. First, that there is always scaremongering on the other side. Scaremongering that you could die, and this information necessary. And they will never tell you why this information is really necessary, because in order to tell you where exactly it was effective, they have to reveal confidential information about terrorists to you. We say this information asymmetry makes this sort of relationship even more problematic. They'll tell you this is useful, they won't tell you why it's useful, they'll go on using it, you cannot effectively scrutinize. But then again, that brings me to the other allied idea that the POI brought up, that this information is in the public domain. We say that when I've committed a crime, I call Anil, and I tell him, Anil, I committed a crime, I did this on Saturday night. We say that I've voluntarily admitted guilt, right? The coercive power of the state has not operated over me for me to reveal something that I did not want to reveal. But in this case, that sort of consent does not simply exist. I cannot say that I will refuse to use Gmail, I will stop using a phone, I will never go online and look at any information whatsoever, and I will not interact with the internet at all simply because I'm too scared of the state. We say consent in this case is actually illusory because essential services like banking, like being able to shop online, like everything is practically provided through the internet right now. And I can't do any of these things without revealing my phone number, revealing my email address, and revealing things that are crucial to my life. We tell you that at this moment, thousands of innocent people not involved in terrorist activities, have the right to go on with their life without the state looking at them. That is Orwellian, it changes my life, and I simply don't want to accept this sort of consequences. For all of these reasons, we're very proud to propose.
We thank that speaker for his speech, and now invite the next speaker of the opposition.
Okay, can you hear me? It is precisely because the Constitution is meant to protect Americans that exemptions should be made when the same amendments meant to protect you are now used to protect instead dangerous information from security forces that can act on it to neutralize the threat. Before I begin, I'm going to deal with two rebuttals. Firstly, on the ownership of information. Mitra came out and told you, right, that basically this information has already been given out to public companies, the public domain, and therefore it's fair for us to use it if we really deem there's a security need to do so. Their response to it was basically, oh, but I can't not use Gmail. Alright, you can't control what others review about you, right? We don't need convenience and excuse, especially because when there's a need for it, you can subpoena people in court to come out and review what was said in private conversations. So we don't think this entire idea applies. But similarly, in the non-digital sphere, right, you basically can't control you from being filmed by security cameras in stores either. So we don't think that it is fair to say that therefore you can't control the fact that you had to use Gmail for the more convenience. But more importantly, if you want the benefits of a digital age, then you must take the negative or the consequences that come from the fact that the information trail is left behind in public. So we think that that is fair on our part. Furthermore, we realize that the protection of people is really the top calculus in this case, right? Therefore, we think that it's extremely important for us to put security first. But furthermore, we don't really think that what we are doing right now, third-party doctrine, is this sort of secret, sneaky act the state is doing out. In fact, it's extremely different from what was done in the past. The very acts that Prime Minister condemned, things like wiretapping and so on. People were angry over that because there was a lack of any consent and a lack of any information about it. We realized the third-party doctrine is in fact living evidence that change can happen in the way government manages information. It is basically open acknowledgement that now we want to tap on information, but we will do it openly. Therefore, the only response they have to that is basically, well, maybe it is a contract, but it's a contract where ignorance pervades it. Then the argument is really to educate people on how to know about this contract, actually read what is going on, and know about the third-party doctrine. But it's not as though other contracts exempt you based on the fact you refuse to know what is going on, right? And furthermore, as a legal subject, people should take responsibility for themselves and what we do with information they leave behind on the public domain. Second rebuttal, on the need for information. The first speaker came out and told us it's too much a part of daily life. We don't see why the fact that information is part of daily life means that there is harm, right? In fact, it's precisely because it tells us so much about our person that we need it for security purpose. That brings me to the idea, what sort of information are we talking about? The first speaker came out and talked about how afraid you will be that your porn habit will be reviewed. We don't think the government really wants to know about that sort of thing, really applies to companies to find out about that. But we see a shift in the deputy speaker when she said, maybe it's not, but she never really told us what it is, right? So let me clarify for you. The sort of information is things like phone records, who have you been calling, web history, what sort of sites and particular people you're looking at. It's a key way to check for things like, say, radicalization, like certain scheming plans being made, and so on. And we do agree that sometimes it's a needle in a haystack sort of search. The way the search is always based on clues and telling ideas beforehand. But you know what? It's an extremely important needle to find. Because that's how information works in the digital age, right? There is a lot of it, you know there are important things in there, and you have to sift through it. That's why we go to third-party providers in the first place, because we have the data that we really need to explore carefully. Also, she came out and told us you can easily get a warrant. We don't think that is true, especially for information. In fact, right, information is the first step towards getting a proper physical warrant and so on when you have enough evidence that something is going wrong. But even if it's so easy, right, then I have a question for you in the moment, sir. If it's so easy for you to get a warrant, then we don't think the state really respects your privacy over your belongings and information that much. Else they would not have made it so easy. At the same time, no matter how easy it is, the time delay would mean that information trails can easily be hidden and eradicated, hindering important clues to ensure security. Before I move on, I will take a point.
Your site keeps trying to differentiate data from metadata. Do you really think that even something like metadata cannot convey intentionally personal and private things about my life to the government?
First and foremost, the government is not interested in extremely private things like porn, so I don't really know why you're so worried about it. Furthermore, we realize that as long as things like private information compromise security, we are perfectly happy to suspend that sort of privacy. That is why the Fourth Amendment was suspended to begin with. But moving on, it is due to your POI again. How efficacious is this data? They came and told us that data makes it harder to predict what is going on, right? That is a blatant lie, because we think that it's much worse without any data clues to go on. And in fact, it complements other physical clues or other information we already have. They also came out with this very strange harm, where they told us there's a likelihood of harassment once we get your information. First and foremost, we told the third-party doctrine is known to one and all that we would take your data if we deem it necessary necessary. Therefore, there is a degree of openness that prevents any sort of government harassment. Also, right, Ms. Ran told you that many checks and balances already exist in the aftermath of things like the wiretapping incidents, right? That is why there's massive political opposition checking out for abuses. There's massive media scrutiny and rights institutions at work, so we are okay with that. But even if harassment of one or two people really happens, right, given the extent of terrorist threats on the internet, given how radical and harmful such acts can be, we are perfectly happy to have that harm exist. That brings me on nicely to my case itself, but I will view from a more legal perspective. I'm going to look at how you restore the protective function of a constitution. First and foremost, the Constitution defines rights and protections of the civilian in context of state power. For instance, the right to remain silent when arrested by the police. Note that you meant. So as they state, right, the Constitution is the best way to protect civilians. It is essentially the state's promise of protection for you, and it's inherent in the state ethos, right, certain freedoms that you should get to have. However, now we see a loophole in place without the third-party doctrine. Basically, there's a loophole being twisted, so huge security threats can get away with it, whilst they know you're protecting my basically freedom to not have my information be reviewed. So we therefore see that security forces have their hands tied as a result of their policy. They know there's important information out there to protect their people, but they can't access it because of the very constitution that enshrines protection of the people. That is the paradox in place. We therefore restore constitutional power to protect civilians by giving the government autonomy to preemptively look for information, to look for clues we could not get otherwise with great speed, and therefore act against threats that we cannot afford to happen to begin with. We also think this affects the people's view of the government's ability to protect you. Because in the Constitution, the hallmark of the state, right, cripples swift intervention instead of enabling it. The government is seen as inherently useless in enabling state security at all. As such, people would not oblige in non-digital urgent scenarios when there's a call for calm, or us to stay at home, or call for witnesses. That is precisely why we need to show that the Constitution does not cripple you, but amendments can be suspended to enable you to help people in need, to restore people's public confidence in what the police and security can do. For all those reasons, therefore, we believe that the Constitution was made to protect people. When there's a need for it, especially in the digital age, we will suspend amendments and make exemptions to allow our people to stay safe. For all those reasons, I'm extremely proud to oppose.
We'd like to thank that speaker for his speech, and would now like to invite the next speaker of the government.
Mr. Speaker, we're very glad that the opposition has, in their model, told you that it's, for example, they haven't taken a stance that they're okay with these mechanisms of interception or intervention being unfair. Right? They've said that we want to prevent crime, but we also want to preserve a modicum of it being fair in a legal sense. Because of that, therefore, we believe that you still have to look at the fairness component and the legal component of the third-party doctrine, which means two things. First, if you're taking information from people, it should be voluntary, as you already said, voluntary revelation, and second, the information should be taken from an intended recipient. These two elements will continue to be important as I go through my speech, because I demonstrate that neither of these elements are satisfied through their model. In addition, they don't really need their model to achieve what they want to. I'll talk to you about the effect of this proposal on three prongs. First, the idea of knowledge and whether or not individuals can really modulate their actions. Second, the idea of, when they try to temper this move by saying it's not really that intrusive, it's not really that bad. And third, the idea of stopping crime. First, on the idea of knowledge, it's very simple. First, because well, you know what, from now on you do know that you reveal information, you're okay with that, therefore you can stop revealing information if you choose to. We told you it's a fictitious choice. You really aren't in a position to, for example, stop taking a credit card because a credit card would involve giving out your address, phone number, etc. Therefore, your knowledge in this point cannot in any way give you a real choice to not be involved in the digital world, which means again that you are putting information out that you really don't want the government to access. Second, they have an extensive argument of how it's not really that intrusive, how it's pretty minor, it doesn't really affect your life. They give you several examples of this. They said, well, you know what, it's not really an examination of content, it's an examination of other things, like web addresses, like phone numbers. We agree, that's true. I'll tell you how revelation of these things can govern your life. This is principled on the premise that your ability to govern your life, right, your ability to define your quality of life and what gives utility to you, of course, should be your own preserve. Which means that if I am a closeted gay man, because I choose to be, and I talk every night to an openly gay man, maybe I am, maybe I'm not, and I choose to speak every night to an openly gay man, that's fine, that's his prerogative as well. The phone number that I dial every night to speak to him is, of course, a part of these intermediaries. Now, the government has access to this. Once I realize the government has access to this, I may indeed have to stop talking to this person. This is a significant intrusion on my life because I must modulate my behavior in the light of surveillance. And it's extremely important. For example, and this is perhaps more trivial but still important, if I like watching porn, again, maybe I do, maybe I don't, and then the government has access to web addresses of porn and I realize this, I'll have to stop watching porn. Maybe that's not a big deal to you, but if I really enjoy doing it and there's no real reason for me to stop, you have no right to stop me from having to do that. You have no right to embarrass me from that process and ensure that I have to govern or modulate the way I behave just because you chose to look into this. This is where abuse comes in, Mr. Speaker, and I've spent a bit of time on this. They've given you 3 reasons for why they think abuse won't happen. A, in the last piece, they said, oh, well, there'll be an open collection of information and therefore it won't be abused. Again, if you want to stop crime, and I'll come to that later, of course not all collection of information can be open, right? Of course there's some secrecy involved in this process because if you want to stop crime and criminals, you must ensure that you collect information from them covertly. Which means you can't, for example, publish every day in the newspaper what you've got and when. So, second, our problem with this is that they think that the opposition will always examine every instance of unfair intrusion you go into. We told you that the sheer volume of data that you have in this process means that the opposition can't accurately track this, which means that the government is in control of the process of collecting information and using it as they please. Other parties, including citizens and oppositions, can't track how you manipulate the data of 80 million people or how many people there are in that country. Right? It's extremely important to remember that this process will essentially remain in the government's control. And why is this? It's because whatever arguments they've given you, this is the third argument we have under abuse, whatever arguments they've given you in favor of a clean and transparent process assumes that this process of interaction between government and individuals occurs in the public eye. We told you in first and second speeches that it doesn't. We told you that primary abuse happens when, for example, you find out that I watch porn or that I'm gay, and the government unilaterally with me blackmails me. The option that I might have had to go to court doesn't exist. I'm not doing anything illegal, remember, Mr. Speaker. I am, however, doing something that may be either supposed to blackmail me because of information I want out in the public, or if the government does put it out in the public, they can assassinate my character because I'm a political opponent of the government, but they say, oh, look, he's a gay man, or oh, look, he watches porn. Which means, again, that the ability that the government has to abuse this process is immense, and I, as the individual, have no control over this process. The ability they have to influence my decision-making and my life are enormous, and the problem is that because they can modulate my life, they can do things like shut down political opposition, and that's happening right now in Turkey, Mr. Speaker, that's a huge problem. Turkey, which of course in decades past was upheld as a bastion of democracy in the region, because it started adopting things like, oh, we can take information on the internet, we can use them as they please, are now clamping down on political opponents by telling them, you know what, you oppose my policies, you're not doing anything illegal, but I know that you're a gay man. If you don't stop doing this, I will tell people that you're a gay man, and I will prevent your ability to get votes. Because of what happens in this process, you start abusing this on a large scale to achieve large-scale political objectives. And we've told you that opposition cannot modulate this process. The last flash here is the idea of crime. They've insisted that it's really important to use this to stop crime. We gave you examples of why this isn't the case. They've refused to accept. Let's go through this again. When exactly can you access someone's information? When can you wiretap someone? When can I have a warrant against someone? When I have probable cause. Now they've misconstrued this term because they don't know the law, and that's fine. What happens in probable cause? It doesn't mean that I literally have to see you building a bomb and then I can arrest you. Right? Let's look at how FISA warrants work in the US. Before that, actually, I take a question. Go ahead.
As your fear of having a porn habit exposed, more important is to have a planned terrorist attack.
That's the, okay, so I'll tell you what it is. Planned terrorist attack. When do you find out who is a potential terrorist? Let's say I'm a person who has any sort of contact whatsoever with another terrorist. I can currently right now get a FISA warrant under the United States law to have that entire house wiretapped. The important part here is A, you really don't need that much probable cause, and second, that there is court scrutiny over this process, that the court can therefore modulate governmental behavior and ensure that the government can't overstep its bounds. How is it different from the application of the third-party doctrine? Because the court is only involved in terms of giving a compulsory subpoena. The court can't question the government and say, do you really have enough to surveil this guy? They can't do that. All you need is minimal probable cause and you can proceed against him, which means the only function that this actually serves is you have absolutely no idea whether he's a terrorist or not. You think Anil may or may not be a terrorist, you start looking through his phone numbers, his emails, you go on a wild goose chase in the vain hope that he may or may not be. The only event in which the third-party doctrine gives you unique benefits, beyond FISA, beyond the Patriot Act, is if you have absolutely no idea other person's involved. Because if you have the mildest suggestion that he's involved, you have available mechanisms to you under the law. And that's extremely important to remember. They're overhyping the issue of crime. You can prevent crime in the vast majority of cases. You can't do it if it's someone absolutely random doing it. The odds of that happening, of there being no indication whatsoever, are virtually nil. In addition, court scrutiny needs to happen to ensure our irresponsible process. We are fairer and we can prevent crime almost as much as them. We are very, very proud to do this.
Opposition, we'd now like to invite the next speaker.
The hypocrisy of side government is really obvious. On one hand, they claim the importance of the value of privacy and the need to protect every single person's information because really anyone can claim privacy and personal detail from almost all kinds of data and we need to protect it. On the other hand, the standard for warrants are really, really low, the Patriot Act is okay, and secret courts and courts are able to get this information. They need to get their priorities straight and decide what they prioritize as a country. We're going to do three things in this speech. One, what type of information are we talking about and how are these pieces of information actually used? Secondly, is it really voluntary intent to reveal the information or is it coercion as they claim on that side? Lastly, we're going to look at privacy specifically and how much as a state we value the concept of privacy and the constitutional privilege of the right to have some sort of privacy. Let's start with what type of information and how they are used. We told you that this is metadata that helps you identify trends and patterns, much like tracking suspects, which is why states are not interested in your contact. They went on a really, really long rant on that side about how people can send an army to your house and things are going to go wrong really badly. We'll deal with that in a bit and why we think the likelihood is really, really low. But we think that the concept of what kinds of information a state gathers is very dependent on what they intend to do with the information. As a state, their priority is national security. They intend to find a particular kind of person out of the information, a particular kind of information that will lead to the probable causes that they want on that side for the ability to get a warrant and even more information to stop the crimes that they need. Which means that you are looking at these third parties as databases of information that as of status quo or as of without the third party doctrine appeal to the Fourth Amendment of the client's privacy to ensure that the government doesn't get any information in order to be able to at least track patterns or some sort of trends to get the basic information that they need. Because this is preemptive information to prevent crime that we're looking at, right? We're not looking on that side of warrants or things to deal with reactive situations where you already have a crime scene, where you already coercion. One, we say maybe, not really, because you can choose to not be online, but you use it for yourself to gain benefit and convenience, and you use it to be in line with what the rest of the world is doing, and to be able to stay in line with what the world is doing in reality. So you take the same so-called negative that comes with it. That means, in the same way that you can't opt out of a physical existence and reality in the country, and all the negatives that come with a physical existence in your country, it comes in the same logic. For example, you can't choose to not go on your roads in the country or choose to not go into a shop. That means your CCTV and your traffic cameras that exist in a public domain are free for the government to use information out of in order to get the very information that they need. And the same logic with the digital age, when all of your information and the state's information are on the internet, when a lot of your communications have moved online and away from the physical sphere, that's when it's extremely important that the same processes of public domain and public entity that exist in reality extend to the digital age. We think that secondly, the argument that they made about ignorance of the individuals because they click yes on terms and conditions without actually reading it makes absolutely no sense. Because the point of terms and conditions and asking you to say yes or accept it is the attempt to seek consent from the individual. If the individual gives consent without reading the provided information to them, then why is that a legit reasoning to claim a lack of consent? That's an individual's fault. That's like saying, I didn't read the contract I signed, therefore it's legitimate to not have a contract enforced on me because I signed it without reading it. It doesn't work in reality. It shouldn't work online. But we think that it was really weird for Deputy Prime Minister then to say that the Patriot Act exists and secret courts exist for all of this ability to deal with terrorism and to deal with all of the other problems. If all of that is possible, then how is that different from all of the things we want to do on our side when it comes to dealing with crime? Before we go into this in more detail and value of privacy, go.
Even assuming you're right that the government's priority is national security, what we gave you are very real reasons as to why governments have incentives to use it for other purposes. And it's the scope of this fear that is material to this debate.
Perfect. Coming to exactly the value of privacy and the potential for abuse. Because this was the argument from them. That as a state, because as they characterize, a state is a collective of individuals, and individuals have different political agendas to misuse information that comes to them. Therefore, there is a potential for abuse, and likelihood is that there is going to be ability to blackmail individuals from the information that they gather. Let's make one thing clear. The context of this debate, as the theme of the motions that were given to you was the United States of America. So we're not looking at corrupt countries that have an incentive to gain some kind of political edge over a particular group. But we think in the United States of America, they never explain what incentive a state whose credibility is hinged on making the right public decisions are in an extremely scrutinized media environment like the United States of America have, to use innocent, non-criminal data in such a manner to gain that kind of advantage. We think that considering how information and data surveillance is used, we don't think that one individual with one specific political agenda has the ability to go through the red tape and the bureaucracy that exists with such data surveillance in order to gain some kind of abuse or blackmail out of it. We do not think that a third-party doctrine is that terrible. In fact, it's extremely useful. We're very proud to oppose.
We'd like to thank that speaker for her speech, and to close the case for the opposition, we'd now like to invite the negative reply speaker.
Because it's simple. Because it seems as though the other side doesn't really know what is going on, right? Let's ground this with a very simple and very real question. If I sifted through phone records and web history, I may find a whole cache of information pointing towards contact or connections from some individuals or groups with radical cells in the Middle East. In this scenario, should the government get access to this information from phone companies out there? To answer this question, there are three main things this debate was all about. Firstly, is this information important? Yes, right? Basically, we told you that many critical communications are done digitally. Furthermore, the information for getting things like physical warrants are often needed through this information that you couldn't get with a warrant to begin with. Furthermore, it allows you to act preemptively on very huge threats out there. That is why we think it's important and you must get hold of it. But this is important, and here's the second question. What is the barrier in a way of me acquiring this very important information? Very simply, it's the Fourth Amendment, right? Which says that I can't seize or search for things without a warrant. But why does the Fourth Amendment require an exemption here? Something the PMC will talk about but never really got to. But I told you anyway, so it's cool. Right? We see that this information is already in the public domain, as Mitra already told you. That is why ownership claims, right, are transferred to other people, to the public domain at best, but at worst are dodgy and doubt can be placed upon the veracity of saying they belong to the original speaker. Furthermore, right, the warrant is not easy to get. Something we pointed out that was wrong. Therefore, it's extremely easy for you to hide that information in the time lag taken when you try to acquire a warrant, assuming that your lack of full information is enough for you to get this warrant to begin with. That's precisely the needle and haystack fashion of an information check, right? I need very large amounts to start. I have some inkling of what I want, but I must sift through all the data to get the final information. Given that we believe that it is very important for you to make an exemption in this case, what is their only reservation, therefore? Their only reservation is that people be scared of from watching porn and calling gay men. That is kind of ridiculous, right? I don't really care if the whole world knows what the entire bench watches in their free time, because I think the security of people is much more important. Furthermore, right, your porn habit, like Miha said, will barely register as a blip in the searches of the government, because they don't look for it, they don't care to look for it, they don't want to look for it. They have bigger fish to fry. They then went on to this very slippery slope argument that because the information is there, I guess people are going to want to harass you, exploit it, assassinate your character. We told you time and again in all three speakers how there are many checks and balances. There are laws in place, especially in the light of the NSA controversy, which means that people are more wary, countries and governments are more wary about exploiting information for personal ends. We showed you how the third-party doctrine is an example in itself of the movement towards balancing openness with the need for security and access to information. We therefore have this doctrine in place, but we make sure you know about it. Viha also came and told you how the image of the US is inherently important and useful in making sure such exploitation doesn't happen anyhow. That is precisely why we need a third-party act. We don't see any true strong reservations in their way to stop the need to allow us to access this highly important information in time. That brings me on to the last issue. What is the calculus for judging this debate? I told you in my speech and I maintain that it's really about the protection of people. And we think that both sides agree, right? But we validate it by saying that there's an emphasis in the Constitution, really, which is meant to enshrine the protection of its people. Furthermore, we have painted for you the degree of the harm in place, and therefore there is a need to suspend things like your private hold on your porn stash for the sake of security. Furthermore, right, they do want to prioritize people's protection as well. Just that somehow they think that it's really about improbable harassment and porn. But honestly, right, the amendment on no search and seizure without warrant, in a non-digital context as it was formed, was probably not about porn, but about things like crime and information that may feed the discovery of it. Therefore, going back to the question, should the government get access to this information on radicalization? Yes, go ahead. Take all our browsing history, our porn stash, because you can instill checks against violation of it. But you can't do anything if you incur an attack that takes lives and rocks the foundations of the state. For all those reasons, I'm extremely proud to oppose.
We'd like to thank that speaker for his speech, and to close the case for the government side, we'd now like to welcome their reply speaker.
Side opposition tried to run this case by telling you that they may be evil, but at least they're trying to prevent crime. But let's look at the sort of analysis they've given you on actually preventing crime. We gave you extensive reasons, logical reasons, on why it's actually hard to look for probable cause in massive stacks of data. Their response from the word go was this piece of rhetoric, right? That it may be hard to find a needle in a haystack, but that needle has to be an important needle. You know what? That needle may be a golden needle with diamonds studded on it. You have to prove to me that it's easy to find. And they haven't done any of that on their side of the house. They tried in the reply, so we'll respond to that. They told you that if you're calling terrorist organizations and radical cells, they need to know. Guess what? This is where our model comes in, and you can do this through the mechanism of probable cause. Let me explain how. So if you think that a radical cell, a known radical cell, isn't tagged, hasn't been given a warrant against by the court, then you're vastly mistaken. Once you start sending emails to their inbox and the government gets hold of the fact that you're exercising communications with them, the government will go to court and say, look, probable cause against this person, I want to read all of his emails. There, you have all the information you need. We say that the standard of information you need, the inkling of suspicion you need is low. We acknowledge that we have to fight terrorism and we're okay with taking this distinction upon ourselves. We say that in that case then, given that you need so little to do all that you need to do, why are you lowering the standard to absolutely nothing? That brings me to our second argument on the effectiveness of warrants. Because if needed look like on side of a government, our only problem is hypocrisy. We're okay with the Patriot Act, we aren't okay with this act. I'll tell you why it's different and what a warrant means. A warrant means that you have to go to court and prove probable cause. You have to prove why is it that you want to read every personal detail of another man. You have to prove why is it that you want to track and survey him and intrude upon his privacy and his personal life. Under their model, you don't have to do so. You have vast amounts of data. You have my phone number. You can find out if I'm a homosexual or not. That is a problem, and that is something that is completely trivialized on their side of the house. The third thing that they completely missed the bus on in this debate is the idea of choice. They told you that you put this out in the public domain. It's the same as every other element of the third-party doctrine. We gave you an example, a concrete example, on what the third-party doctrine effectively covers. It covers a voluntary admission of guilt to a third person. When I call Anil and tell him that I'm a terrorist, it does not cover a situation where I'm forced to reveal information about myself to a third-party company simply because the choice between revealing information and not revealing information is a choice between having a credit card and not having a credit card, having a bank account, not having a bank account, being able to send emails to my employer and not being able to send emails to my employer. There is no real choice. They say you admit to this when you have CCTV cameras on the road. That is what we're trying to change here. A CCTV camera on every corner of the road. If that's the sort of state they're okay with, that brings us to the fourth biggest problem we have with that side of the house. They completely trivialized the value of privacy in this debate. They told you that this is about finding out that you're watching porn. We think that's significant in itself. They told you that the government is a human agency. It wants to know these things about you because of the potential to blackmail you and to embarrass you. Find out an opposition politician who isn't interested in the fact that you're a homosexual and let's have this debate there. We tell you that there is another problem with the sort of logic that's come from their side of the house, right? They tell you that there are adequate safeguards. To which we told you, it's not possible to collect this sort of information in the entire transparent process that you're talking about. If it is about preventing future crime, then you must do this without tipping off the other person that you're finding out information that's relevant to the commission of that crime. How will you do this transparently? No response whatsoever. They told you the democratic process will take care of it. Relying on the mercy of opposition politicians to constantly look at every nugget of data that every police official in every district is analyzing so that they can find out whether or not it's being misused. We say this sort of scrutiny is impractical and won't really prevent everything. A case-by-case court analysis will, and they haven't responded to that. Finally, they told you this is like extracting testimony from other people. No, it's like asking other people to confess about information that they've stolen from you. That's the difference. We are very proud to propose.
I'd like to thank all three people tonight. Invite everyone to give out the finalists a round of applause.